Good evening, welcome. Nice to see familiar faces. I'm Jasmine Raymond, DS curator, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Artists on Artists lecture series. Our lecture series this year is dedicated to the memory of Bradford Race. He was a DIA trustee from 2002 to 2010. And I would like to begin by acknowledging his generosity and commitment to DIA, and in particular to this program. I would also like to thank the C Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for their generous support throughout the years. Closer to my desk, I need to thank a few people: Jean Dreskin, Patrick Hellman, and Rebecca Rice for their essential help in coordinating this program. The lecture series addresses the work and practice of individual artists and in DIA's collection through the eyes or the lens, one could say, of their peers. I'm pleased to welcome tonight's speaker, Joachim Koester. Since the early 90s, Joachim has made psychologically charged works that expand the distinction through our optical experience of fiction and non-fiction, reality and the imaginary. His work has lured us to spaces of absorption and blissful hypnosis. His serious affection for the sequence of photography, whether it's in the lens of the camera, whether it's in photographic or in film, take us in expeditions in our imagination and our visual experience. And we can remember the early works, The Days for Night of Christiana, the series of work based on the artist commune in Copenhagen, or the haunted landscapes of his Kant walks, or those desolated sites from his series of The Travel of Jonathan Harker. Solitude in his work and the silence of that experience, for me, evokes that inner journey of our human psyche. In recent years, he has combined this analytical aspect of film and the camera and our encounter and access to the mysterious and almost supernatural effects or the possible ground of that state of mind, of the uncanny or the restlessness aspect of the mind. And I think he does it in an incredible way because he never enters simple readings of occultism or mysticism, but they are unraveling experiences of the inner working of the eye and how it connects to the psychic as an instrument for that. It is this attention or this particular obsession, one could say, that I feel links Joachim's work to LeWitt's, the amplitude of LeWitt's endeavors. And tonight I'm very pleased that he chose to speak on LeWitt, an artist that is very beloved, not only for us, the people that work at DIA, but to our audience. He's nonstop one of the favorites. Born in 1962 in Copenhagen, Joachim studied at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, and he has had recently numerous solo exhibitions, including a recent show that opened in Hanover, but also a monographic exhibition at the Rufino Tamayo and at the Power Plant in Toronto. Please help me welcome Joachim Koester.
So first, thanks to DIA for hosting this, and to Jasmine for inviting me. And a special thanks to Jean Dreskin, who has contributed with a lot of input and a lot of answers to all my questions. I didn't know a lot about LeWitt when I started. I don't know if I know a lot now, but I knew even less then. So a big thanks for all her help with the research. Also thanks to Green Naftali Gallery and Alice Rodman, to Raimundas, Lars Bang-Larsen, Sture Johannessen, Sam McCune, and Marco Pasi. They have all lent their expertise in various ways. When I got the invitation from Yasmil, my first thought was that I was going to speak about Smithson, one of the artists from the Dia collection that I've looked a lot on his work. But it felt a little bit predictable. So I went to Dia Beacon on 2 occasions, actually, to look for subjects, subject matter. And it would be kind of an interesting perspective to look at the collection that way, and enjoyable as ever. But I would leave just as indecisive about whom or what to speak about when I arrived. So I was back and forth in this limbo until the end of April, when I was traveling to Mexico with a growing sense of urgency that I really had to make up my mind. In Mexico City, I stayed with a friend and artist, Mayo Garcia Torres, who has a small but very good collection of art books. Here I found Peter Osborne's book on Sol LeWitt's sentences on conceptual art. I pulled out the book and read the first line. Conceptual artists are mystics rather than rationalists. They leap to conclusions that logic cannot reach. And I thought maybe this sentence and how it connects to Sol LeWitt's work, how to go from Sol LeWitt's work to this, is something I could talk about. So that's what I'll attempt to do. So mystic conceptualists. Commonly a mystic would be understood as a person who dwells in mysticism, who studies the occult, a performer of esoteric rituals, someone informed by the hidden and the obscure. And here we see Sol LeWitt burying a cube containing an object of importance but little value from 1968. Obviously, Sol LeWitt didn't use the term spiritualist conceptualists, and for good reasons, even though it's a term often used to cover various esoteric practices that inspired modernists like Malevich and Kandinsky, and a word that was at the focus of the show The Spiritual in Art at Los Angeles County Museum in 1986. The problem with spiritualist is that the term is so heavily affirmative and bogged down with connotations of contemplation. The term conceptual mystic is far less resolved, more vibrant. The wording speaks of its time as well. The sentences were written in 1968 and published in Art and Language in 1969, so at the end of the mystic 60s, where everything mysterious was marvelous. Later in 1981, Sol LeWitt was asked directly about his wording in a correspondence with Andrea Miller-Keller, and where she suggests a more spiritualist-like, transcendental understanding of the use. Sol LeWitt. I once said conceptual artists are mystics. Andrea Miller-Keller. When you said conceptual artists are mystics, what did you mean by mystics? In that context, some might say that a mystic is someone who affects a union with some higher power. I suspect you had something else in mind. Sol LeWitt. I mean non-rational. The 1960s, when Sol LeWitt wrote his sentences, is one of the few historical decades where progressive politics merged with ideas of the irrational. Another, maybe less known moment is 100 years before. In the 1850s, when channeled spirits of the dead would call for the abolishment of slavery and speak of socialism, women's rights, and a renegotiation of the institution of marriage, as well as the promotion of free love. There was a great debate on what that actually implied. So the agenda of the other world was a lot more practical and political than one might expect. And what can be gleaned from it is that the spirits of the past have mostly spoken through the free spaces available, seances, trances, or patterns riddled with chance and randomness. These make platforms for messages that cannot be communicated elsewhere. The artist activist group, Center for Tactical Magic, calls the astral plane one of the last unregulated public spaces. So I thought maybe Sol LeWitt's art and practice could be seen as creating such a space or platform, such an unregulated public space? And in case so, and going with sentence number 3, which reads, irrational judgments lead to new experiences, what messages or new experiences could his work be alluding to? I noted this down on an October afternoon in Williamsburg. So it took a while for me to actually begin, 5 months to be precise. So I would think with some relief, at least this is a start. I went to the kitchen to make some coffee, and there I was greeted by a big pile of copies on LeWitt, kindly compiled by Jean Dreskin, and which I admit I hadn't really looked at yet. It felt too overwhelming to have them close to where I was writing, so I decided to leave them in the kitchen and then eventually fetch them one at a time. Anyway, out there I let my eyes wander over the top page, which happened to be a text by Gary Garrels. Actually, I had to do a Google search to find out what book the introduction came from, since the pile was a mess and I hadn't done proper labeling yet, but I'll return to this Google search later. Garrels was right. Across 4 decades and many forms and materials, LeWitt's work consistently calls forth the same character. One can say that in his work he champions equality, accessibility, open exchanges, and public space. These are the values at the heart of democracy, extending the principle at the core of the American Republic, inherited from classical Athens. LeWitt builds on these foundations of moral purpose, re-engaging both classical humanism and the romantic utopianism of pioneers of abstract art. I think quite a few of the qualities mentioned here are at odds or directly opposing to anything that associates with mystic or the new experiences of the irrational. What is evoked is LeWitt's art as representing the powers of mind and rationalism. So Garrels' introduction made me reconsider what I had just written. I went back to the material I got from Dia to see if there would be at least 2 tendencies in the literature about LeWitt: the writers who attempted to incorporate the content of the first 3 of LeWitt's sentences in their essays, and the ones who would not. Of course, for my purpose, I was exclusively interested in the writings that included the mystical, non-rational, irrational LeWitt, just to see how it was done. And just a quick note before I start reading the quotes. About 10 years ago, I found myself going to Brussels quite often. And I've always been very interested in Marcel Botar's. So I thought it might be an opportunity to meet people who knew him, to kind of collect incidental stories about him while it was still possible. I could do it with the help of my gallerist, Jan Mott. So fleeting memories and impressions that might be forgotten or disappear otherwise, things that would never kind of make it into a serious essay about him, but would still be kind of important for telling something about his person and how he's worked and how he worked. So I would tape conversations with people. And one was Freddy Devray, an old friend of Botar's. And he would tell me that he would ask me, do you know why Marcel Botar's was so obsessed by eagles? And I was, of course, I answered no. And he said, it's because he looked like one. And I think that's actually true. Anyway, Freddie also told me that Botar's would often point to one of his artworks to ask for his opinion. So it's almost like a game. And Freddie would have to struggle hard to put words on the work, since they were often incomplete and usually situated in an ambiguous gray zone between poetry, image, and object. And Botar's would listen attentively. He was totally oblivious to whether Freddie Ray liked the proposed artworks or not. It was the process itself, adding words to these, that interested him, kind of getting from one thing to another. So I think this covers how I use the quotes. It's not about better or worse arguments. It's about putting words to something, to kind of go from one thing to another, to go from LeWitt to something irrational. So Lynn Cook writes on the wall drawings at Dear Beacon, given that for him artists are mystics, and given to his conviction that irrational thoughts should be followed absolutely and logically, many works fall outside the parameters of what usually expected of conceptualism, that is, rational, logical exegesis. For example, he often capitalizes on circumstances, on the quirks of a particular architectural situation, on the skills and inventiveness of his assistants executing the drawing, or on the different effects produced by substituting one medium or material for another. Crayon in place of pencil, color instead of graphite, or gray or black surface instead of the more usual white wall. Most of his drawings can never be exactly replicated, for each instantation is a new interpretation, as a new performance of a musical score. Kenneth Baker writes in his book Minimalism from 1989, in his wall drawings and in some of his works on paper, LeWitt substitutes the transcendence of meaning with the indeterminacy of relations between instructions and resultant details. Relations that are mysterious only in being unpredictable. There is no meaning to the drawings that cannot be explained in terms of the objective factors, such as the wording of the specifications, the circumstances of the site, a draftman's decisions, and an account of the cultural context. And Rosalind Krauss writes about LeWitt in an article called LeWitt in Progress. The experience of the work goes exactly counter to the look of thought, particularly if thought is understood as classical expressions of logic. For such expressions, whether diagrammic or symbolic, are precisely about the capacity to abbreviate, to use in short the notion of etc. The babble of LeWitt's serial expansion has nothing of the economy of a mathematician's language. It has the excessiveness of the speech of children or of the very old, in its refusal to summarize, to use a single example that will imply the whole. It's like those feverish accounts of events composed of a string of almost identical details and connected by an. But it is not entirely like those examples, for the spasmodic hiccup of repetitious detail have about them a quality of randomness, disorganization, a lack of system. And LeWitt's outpouring of example, his piling up, for instance, is riddled with system, shot through with order. There is, in variations of incomplete open cubes, as they say, a method in this madness. For what we find is the system of compulsion, of the obsessional's unwavering ritual, with its precision, its neatness, its finky exactitude, covering over an abyss of irrationality. It is in that sense design without reason, design spinning out of control. The obsessional solutions to problems strike us as mad, not because the solutions are wrong, but because the setting of the problem itself, but because in the setting of the problem itself, there is a strange short circuit of a necessity. And Krauss intercuts her text with excerpts from Beckett of such a solution to a problem that such short circuits necessity. It's about a man who sucks stones and has this system of kind of placing the stones in his pocket and putting them in his mouth and back in the pockets. Adrian Piper elaborates on this connection to Samuel Beckett. Salt's work and my work were very influenced by our readings of Samuel Beckett. Beckett has this very interesting way of draining external references from a situation by listening to the permutations, listening to the variations in how a character can behave. He achieves in that way a kind of existential clarity, because one is confronted with the situation in a semi-meaningless form. But of course, the meaning of the situation is simply the situation itself. It has nothing external to it. So that would be another form of permutational conceptual strategy that Saul was using. And Robert Smithson. LeWitt is concerned with concepts of paradox. Everything LeWitt thinks, writes, or has made is inconsistent and contradictory. The original idea of his art is lost in a mess of drawings, figurines, and other ideas. Nothing is where it seems to be. His concepts are prisons devoid of reason. And lastly, here's Sol LeWitt, talking about a group of sculptures called complex forms from the late 80s to Martin Friedman. I was trying to figure out how to make things that I had never imagined. I would rule off a grid on a sheet of paper, and where the lines intersected, I would place a number, say, from 1 to 10 to indicate the height of a vertical line from that point. The next step was to connect the elevated dots, which led to these unpredictable forms. The drawings were then turned over to a carpenter, and the small-scale wood models were afterwards made into full-scale pieces of wood and aluminum. I was thinking it was too bad that LeWitt never, and I don't know if he ever got to do that, but it would be obvious that he would have made an amazing monument to chance. So lastly, I'll read a quote from Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum. It's a book about 3 book editors who in the early 70s are sucked into a world of occult manuscripts as the opportunistic publisher has given up on political books to explore this new and booming market. In the part I'm reading, the narrator, a university-trained Marxist, is starting his engagement with this new mystical world, inspired by all the manuscript that he has to read through, written by authors that the 3 jokingly called the Satanicals. Still, I was accumulating experience and information, and I never threw anything away. I kept files on everything. I didn't think to use a computer. Instead, I had cross-reference index cards. Laplace, Kant, Königsberg, the 7 bridges of Königsberg, theorems of topology. It was a little like that game where you have to go from sausage to Plato in 5 steps by association of ideas. Let's see. Sausage, pig bristle, paintbrush, mannerism, idea, Plato, easy. Even the sloppiest manuscript would bring 20 new cards for my hoard. I had a strict rule, which I think secret services follow too. No piece of information is superior to another. Power lies in having them all on file and on finding the connections. There are always connections. You only have to find them. So back that afternoon, I was also looking for a connection. To find out where that the article of Gary Garrels was coming from, and then came this, and on the top it says, "Sol LeWitt is to art as Bach was to music," says conceptual artist Adrian Piper. So I'm gonna play a bit of Bach. If I can find it. Let's see. Just has to do with this before it starts. So it's a film by Strawberry called The Chronicle of Anna Magdalena Bach. And they did the film in 1968 and dedicated the film to the struggle of the North Vietnamese people. So in Allegories of Film, David E. James elaborates on this. Jean-Marie Straub's dedication of the Chronicle of Anna Magdalena Bach to the North Vietnamese people establishes a connection between absolute formal purity and some kind of social responsibility. A connection which, in order to be understood, demands one to travel a tortuous path through the chain of historical determinations. The capitalist mode of material production, the industrial mode of film production, the flight of film from the industry into the art world, the history of the art world, the art world's formal preoccupations and the social relation it depends on. The path is so distended and involves so many complicated maneuvers that to reduce the entire system to a statement of simple causality in the end makes explanation seems like indictment. So I think what is implied by James is that at one point this route would actually enable Stravoyer to get from Bach to the Vietnam War. It was so and so functional, but now it has fallen into disarray, has turned into a distended path. An image that suggests that the activity of connecting, getting from one thing to another, takes place in the mental landscape. When it comes to Stravoyer's dedication, this distended path is now disturbingly close to the esoteric path demonstrated by the method of the protagonist of Ego's novel, who builds a machine of correspondences that enables him to connect the most unlikely of things. The forgotten and the new start to look alike. That's how Smithson would probably see it. It would both be kind of overgrown wildernesses. When it comes to Sol LeWitt, connecting him with something mystic and irrational becomes a point in itself. He falls outside the parameters of what is usually expected, as Lynn Cook writes. This is how LeWitt's sentences perform. And the new experiences produced by his art-making machines should maybe be understood, besides from something tangible, as an invitation to stray, to find new routes in the landscape that makes the work and its critical reception. It becomes a sort of game where we try to settle something that more than likely will remain unsettled. As a footnote, I want to mention that Stravoyer's dedication came as a consequence of the enormous resistance to the film they encountered. The film was 10 years in its making, a frustrating process which led the filmmakers to gradually more provocative statements. Among these, the Viet Cong, or the North Vietnamese people dedications, with whose struggle against overwhelming opposition they identified. Nevertheless, it's a brilliant film. Stravoyer rigorously emphasizes the material basis on which Bach's music rested. The thousands of notes that he had to compose, which was transcribed by his wife, the letters, the musicians, the pay, the political intrigue. Paradoxically, this very insistence on the material basis of the music makes the performance of it refreshingly strange. It adds an alienated intensity, which I think can be read into the stone-faced and heavily wigged musicians. There's a sense of uncertainty related to why and what they're playing, as if Bach's spiraling variations start to question the very nature of the ritual and certainly its meaning. So the focus on the material basis of the production makes one similarity between LeWitt and Bach, as he is presented here in Stravoyer's film. Another is their mutual interest in what can possibly be made out of a theme, the multitude of variations. But there might be others. Lynn Cook wrote about Sol LeWitt that each wall drawing is like a new performance of a musical score. So as this continues behind me, I'll read a bit from a text written by Chris Cobb, printed in Believer magazine, titled "An Installer Reports on His Sometimes Painful Experiences Performing Works from the Sol LeWitt Drawing Retrospective at Mass Mocha," which opened in 2008. Chris Cobb was part of a team of 13 professional artists, 9 apprentices, 14 interns, as well as LeWitt's closest assistants, who abandoned jobs and homes in order to spend 5 months in North Adams, while doing nothing but installing a total of 100 wall drawings at Mass Mocha. Realizing so many wall drawings was a massive undertaking, and Cobb gives some details on the quantity of materials and effort it took to realize the exhibition. It took almost 50 people, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 5 months to complete the show. For the pencil drawings alone, 180,000 leads of red, blue, and yellow and graphite were used. Once the project started, there would be up to 3 people doing nothing but sharpening pencils. Cobbs writes on the instructions for wall drawing 343 or 343. It reads like a Zen koan, a statement that cannot be understood by rational thinking, or a secret code comprising equal parts precision and mystery. And the instructions for the drawing he was working on, 343, is as following from LeWitt. On a black wall, 9 geometric figures, parentheses, including right triangle, cross X, in squares. The backgrounds are filled in solid white. So it could most certainly be compared to a grimoire, a magical recipe, since the instructions withhold as much information as it gives. And on the actual process of performing the drawing, 343 copyrights. We're using water-soluble crayon pastels that have the consistency of frozen butter. If held in the hand, they will indeed begin to melt. We are supposed to scribble in random directions until our hands hurt, and the layers of lines look almost opaque. The proper way to scribble is to use large random strokes, never little intense strokes. Little intense strokes make an area too dark and too dense too fast. If our hands don't hurt, according to one of LeWitt's most senior assistants, we are not doing a good job. My hands hurt, especially my right hand. It alternates between numbness and soreness. So I guess I'm doing a good job. We're told that the drawing should start to look right after 2 weeks of scribbling in all directions. Layers upon layers of scribbling. After a while, I noticed that the older crayon layers are beginning to physically change, becoming more brittle, becoming more solid and brittle, in some cases flaking off when we draw over them. What started as a series of vague instructions, vague written instructions, begins over time to take on a tactile and evolving physical presence. Visitors constantly interrupt us as we work. When a visitor asks us what we are doing, I explain how, despite our adherence to written out formulaic instructions, LeWitt's wall drawings are performed as much as they are drawn to his specifications. You have to be enacting them to understand. So you have to be enacting them to understand. I think that's important when we speak about what is mystical in Sol LeWitt. Oh. So this is drawing 343. Here's the scribbling. I return to where I started, since there was more to the quote from the exchange between Andrea Miller-Keller and Sol LeWitt. Their full exchange, at least this part, goes like this. Andrea Miller-Keller. Do you still place as high a priority on avoiding subjectivity as before? I'm thinking of your installation of large photographs, statues, a melodrama, and autobiography, your book documenting the Hester Street loft in New York City. And then comes Sol LeWitt saying, I once said conceptual artists are mystics, and she said, when you said conceptual art is mystic, and Sol LeWitt says, I mean non-rational. So what to make out of this? Obviously, one explanation could be that the obvious shift from avoiding subjectivity to doing an autobiography would account for the non-rational. On the other hand, personal references were not uncommon among the minimalists. For example, Dan Flavin's huge neon installation dedicated to his dog, Untitled, for my dear bitch, Areli, in 1981, accompanied by a diploma the dog won in a hunting competition. I don't think that can be topped. So I decided that the answer, if there is one, had to be hidden elsewhere. The work autobiography is described in this way in a catalogue of all Sol LeWitt's book works. The book, the autobiography book, moves from the general to the specific, building a very personal and revealing account of the artist and his involvements. It provides interesting clues to LeWitt, what he thinks and what he does and how he lives. This is done in more than 1,000 black and white images. The artist catalogs virtually every corner, crevice and item of his loft. There's only one image of the artist himself, an out-of-focus image with his face hidden. A detail which somehow resonates with what Chris Cobb also observes in the Believe article, that the personality of the artist, LeWitt, not the person though, is buried deep within an abstraction. Or buried deep, so he is down there in the right corner. Or buried deep within in all kinds of systems. The system seems to be the dominant subject matter in the project. Oops. Adram Weinberg writes on autobiography. One is struck by LeWitt's interest in systems upon systems, overlapping and interlocking. Images allude to recording systems, writing systems, postal systems, political systems, information systems, publishing systems, religious systems, typographical systems, organizational systems, publishing systems, gallery systems, school systems, etc. And then he concludes, for all the order implied by these systems, one realized that ultimately they're constructs, oftentimes idiosyncratic and personal. So that's what is mystic or non-rational about it. I posed the question also to Jean Dreskin about what exactly is mystic or irrational in these images, and she suggested that it's his daily bodily interaction with these systems or mundane objects, that this interaction is done without thinking in a semi-unconscious way and often performed like a ritual. Lastly, I want to suggest another possibility, and there are probably many more. Many of the systems that LeWitt documents can be seen as sort of communication machines, and thereby analog to his art-making machines. A signal is fed into them, and they generate a feedback. We turn on the electricity, and the lights go on, etc. But inside all these systems that preoccupy LeWitt in his artwork and that frames his daily life, we might find a hidden voice, an unruly voice, a non-rational voice that could be termed negative feedback. An example of this could be the microphone, which amplifies my voice. If the signal backfire, it produces a loss of order, an uncontrolled roar. In the 60s, this negative feedback phenomenon really took off. It's hard to imagine Jimi Hendrix without feedback. People manipulated systems and technologies against their purpose, adding an element of randomness and disorganization that ruled out rational decision-making process. It led to the production of previously unheard of sounds and artworks, which still has philosophical and political potential to be unraveled. So maybe that's what LeWitt means. That the systems themselves, the system that surrounds our daily life, has an unrealized and hidden potential, as well as a hidden voice of disorganization. So that was Pendulum music by Steve Reich. I think also the present economic crisis shows that within our economic system is most certainly a kind of a irrational voice coming out, which is kind of felt very clearly. As I was doing research for this talk, I was reminded by a poster by Sture Johannesson, the kind of main psychedelic artist from Scandinavia from the 60s, that was hanging in our family hallway as I grew up in the Copenhagen suburbs during the 70s. It was a poster that Sture Johannesson did for Moderne Museet in 1969. It advertises the opening hours of the museum and adds a modern fable of three men who arrive late only to find the museum doors locked. They are all intoxicated, one by alcohol, another by opium, and the last by hashish. And the story recount their various reactions and ideas for getting in. I know that the psychedelic subtext was lost on my parents. They just liked how it looked. And I think it was lost on me too. But from the time it went up until the time it went down, I guess I was 15 then, I always wondered about the text in the right corner. It says, "The key is Frank." What did that mean? It's up there. Which brings me back to LeWitt and the idea that the mystic is mysterious because he, and now we are speaking about Sol and Sture, cannot communicate his insights in a straightforward manner. Not that he wishes to hide anything, but these insights cannot be taught since they deal with what is not yet known. To formulate this in linguistics terms, the mystic cannot use an already existing language or system. He has to invent one. A system that sets the process in motion or activates the experience. The idea becomes a machine that makes art, or as Chris Cobb mentions, you have to be enacting them to understand. I talked to Sture, and the key is Frank is actually a lot more mundane than my speculation. It comes from the back of an album by Bob Dylan. So all those thoughts in vain, but they were very formative. Sture also told me that besides from Dylan, another of his artistic inspirations of the time was, of course, Sol LeWitt. Which brings me to this, that I've rarely come across an artist who have been so consistently spoken about among friends and colleagues and acquaintances. Sol LeWitt was not only an artistic inspiration for many, but also a mysterious, benign presence, as the gallerist Mitchell Algus says in an interview, or the moral center of the artistic community, as Adrian Piper recalls about the downtown scene in the late 1960s. So LeWitt will also be remembered for his support of other artists, as well as gallerists, publicists, and others, in terms of advice, encouragement, and sometimes also financially. So here, lastly, is a letter that Sol LeWitt wrote to Eva Hesse in 1965, when she was going through a big crisis in Kettwig, Germany, with her marriage failing and feeling her work failing as well. And I find his kind of answer quite moving, or his letter to her quite moving. And I think it says a lot about LeWitt's generosity and desire to be of help. It also says something about his inclusiveness and his way of thinking about art. And it's from 1965, I think I said that. And this is, by the way, a drawing by Eva Hesse from the time, one of her crazy machines. From your description and from what I know of your previous work and your ability, the work you're doing sounds very good. Drawings, clean, clear, but crazy like machines. Larger, bolder, real nonsense. That sounds wonderful. Real nonsense, do more. More nonsensical, more crazy, more machines, more breasts, penises, cunts, whatever. Make them abound with nonsense. Try and tickle something inside you, your weird humor. You belong in the most secret part of you. Don't worry about cool, make your uncool. Make your own world. If you fear, make it work for you. Draw and paint your fear and anxiety. And stop worrying about big, deep things, such as to decide on a purpose and a way of life, a consistent approach to even some impossible end or even an imagined end. You must practice being stupid, dumb, unthinking, empty. Then you will be able to do. I have much confidence in you, and even though you are tormenting yourself, the work you do is very good. And don't think that your work has to conform to any idea of flavor. It can be anything you want it to be. So as a tribute to LeWitt, I want to play Baldassare sings LeWitt, but before that, a few variations. Here's work by Pierre Bismuth and Jonathan Monk, and it's Baldassare sings LeWitt, but dubbed in Lithuanian.
11 numeris. Idėjos nebūtinai išsidėsto logiška seka. Jos gali pasukti netikėtą kryptimi, tačiau kiekviena idėja turi būti sugalvota iki galo prieš suformuluojant naują. 12 numeris. Kiekvienas fizinę formą įgaunantis meno kūrinys turi daug variacijų, kurios tokios formos neįgauna. 13 numeris.
Or an instrumental version by another Lithuanian artist, Artūras Bumšteinas. Oops.
I'd like to sing for you some of these sentences that LeWitt has written on conceptual art. I feel that this is a tribute to him in that I think that these sentences have been hidden too long in the pages of exhibition catalogs, and that perhaps that by my singing them for you, it will bring these sentences to a much larger public. I'll use the same ordering and numbering that he has. I'll try to pause between each statement for clarity. It may be that occasionally I will have to sing one sentence over more than once and that I might not get the phrasing correct. Conceptual artists are mystics rather than rationalists. They leap to conclusions that logic cannot reach. Number 2, rational judgments, repeat rational judgments. Number 3, illogical judgments lead to new experience. Number 4, formal art is essentially rational. Number 5, irrational thoughts should be followed absolutely and logically. Number 6, if the artist changes his mind midway through the execution of the piece, he compromises the result and repeats past results. Number 7, the artist's will is secondary to the process he initiates from idea to completion. His willfulness may only be ego. Number 8, when words such as painting and sculpture are used, they connote a whole tradition and apply a consequent acceptance of this tradition, this placing limitations on the artist, who would be reluctant to make that goes beyond the limitations.
So Mario Garcia Torres, he actually did a karaoke version as well, which I'm not gonna show, but that's everything. Thank you.
Do you want to take some questions?
Sure. Yeah. If there is any.
Anybody? Questions? Are you all hypnotized?
I would like to have this in print. Are you going to publish this anywhere?
I don't know yet. I think this can't really be printed yet, but
It was really very interesting.
oh, thank you.
Online, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Good typist.
Pun? The good typist, yeah. Yeah, I need to put it through spelling control. Yeah. Sure. No, I actually didn't know much about. I knew of him, of course, and the work, but I never met him. Well, unfortunately, not. So I started completely blank, actually. Oh. Yeah.
Why do you think choosing LeWitt as a subject in your talk tonight would be unpredictable?
if it was unpredictable. Did I say it was that it was supposed to be?
You said that you thought if you talked about Smithson, that would be predictable.
Or I think what I meant was I actually was referring a little bit to a conversation I had with Jean before, and she said that sometimes when they invite artists, they can kind of predict what artist they're going to talk about. And for me, it was probably a little bit more likely to talk about Smithson than LeWitt. So that was what I meant. No more questions? Yeah? Thank you.